welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back in time, uncovering the ancient history of Bali, specifically before the Dutch arrived. We'll be looking at academic papers and historical accounts, even some insights from modern-day Balinese people.
Absolutely.
Ready to explore some ancient Balinese kingdoms.
It's going to be fascinating. It's not just about dates and names.
Right,
We're
sure.
going to explore how these ancient societies functioned, their power dynamics, and the cultural legacies that still shape Bali today.
Our journey starts way back, even before the Beta Kingdom, mentioned in a 914 CE inscription.
Oh, wow.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
A sophisticated civilization flourishing on this island over 1,000 years ago. And this wasn't even the beginning. This inscription points to even earlier societies, a long and rich history.
It's truly remarkable. And to add another layer, we have the Baliaga people, the original inhabitants of Bali.
Oh, interesting.
Their culture and traditions were different from what we typically associate with Bali today. It's like a lost world.
Baliaga. It's like a hidden chapter in Bali's story. I'm curious how their culture differed from what emerged later. What makes them so distinct?
The Baliaga represent a cultural lineage that predates the major external influences that shaped later Balinese society. They held unique beliefs and practices and social structures, evolving in relative isolation. Sadly, much of their history has been obscured by time and the arrival of new cultural forces, but their legacy endures, reminding us of Bali's rich and diverse tapestry.
So who are these game changers who arrived on the scene and reshaped Balinese society?
Our major turning point was in 1343 CE, with the Majapahit Empire's conquest of Bali.
Wow.
They were a dominant force in Southeast Asia, and their influence dramatically altered the course of Balinese history. This wasn't just a military takeover.
Right.
It led to the establishment of a new dynasty and introduced the caste system, heavily influenced by the Indian model.
The caste system, like the one in India with Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and so on. That must have had a profound impact on Balinese society.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a temporary imposition. It became deeply ingrained in the social fabric of Bali. The system divided society into the Triwangsa, the upper castes, and the Jabawangsa, the lower castes. The Triwangsa consisted of the Brahmana, the priests and scholars, the Kshatriya, the warriors and rulers, and the Vaisya, the merchants and farmers.
I'm already sensing a rigid social hierarchy emerging. And with a system as complex as this, there had to be a way to distinguish between different levels within each caste, right?
You're right on the mark. Each caste had specific titles for men and women, further solidifying the hierarchy. For example, within the Kshatriya caste, male descendants of the Balinese royal family held the title Kakurda. These elite individuals, known as the Puri, became incredibly powerful in the kingdoms that arose after the Majapahit conquest.
The Puri. So they were like the royalty of Bali, wielding significant power and influence. It makes me wonder, how did this intricate caste system and the rise of the Puri shape the lives of everyday Balinese people? And what happened to the Baliaga amidst these sweeping changes?
Those are excellent questions. And they take us deeper into the fascinating world of ancient Bali. Imagine a society where your status at birth determined your path in life, your opportunities, even your interactions with others. The Baliaga, facing this new social order, were often pushed to the margins.
Right.
Their traditional ways of life increasingly overshadowed by the dominant culture. Some assimilated, adopting aspects of the new system, while others retreated to more remote areas, clinging to their ancestral customs. It's a story of resilience and adaptation in the face of dramatic change.
It's fascinating how the Baliaga represent this enduring thread, connecting modern Bali to its ancient past. But I'm also curious about the Puri. You mentioned they held significant power in the kingdoms that emerged after the Majapahit conquest.
Yes.
Can you paint a picture of what life was like in these kingdoms? What role did the Puri play in shaping these societies?
Let's take a closer look at the kingdom of Klungkung. Established in the 17th century, it became a center of cultural and political power in Bali. Imagine stunning palaces, a vibrant art scene and ceremonies, steeped in ancient traditions.
Wow.
The Puri in Klungkung, as descendants of the royal lineage, held prominent positions within the kingdom.
So they weren't just figureheads, they were actively involved in running the kingdom.
Absolutely. They played key roles in governance, religious ceremonies, and the preservation of cultural heritage. They were patrons of the art supporters of local communities, and in many ways the embodiment of Klungkung's identity.
It sounds like the Puri had a deep connection to the people and the culture of Klungkung. I'm curious, did this close relationship influence how they responded to external pressures or threats?
That's a great question, and it leads us to a pivotal moment in Klungkung's history. As the Dutch began to exert their influence in the region, they encountered resistance from the Balinese kingdoms, who fiercely defended their independence and cultural identity.
I imagine the arrival of a foreign power, like the Dutch, must have been a shock to the Balinese world.
Yeah.
How did the people of Klungkung, and especially the Puri, react to this challenge?
Klungkung became a focal point of resistance against Dutch colonialism. In 1908, facing the prospect of subjugation, the Klungkung royal family, including the Puri, made a fateful decision.
Oh.
Rather than surrender to the Dutch, they chose to make a powerful statement about their unwavering commitment to their kingdom and their cultural heritage.
I'm sensing a dramatic turn of events here. What did they do?
In a display of defiance that has resonated through Balinese history, the Klungkung royal family, along with hundreds of their followers, committed mass suicide in what is known as the Puputan.
Wow, that's incredibly tragic, but also profoundly moving. It's like they chose death over dishonor, sacrificing themselves to preserve the soul of their kingdom.
The Puputan became a symbol of Balinese resistance against colonial rule. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion to one's cultural identity. And it's a reminder that even when facing overwhelming odds, people are willing to fight for what they believe in, even if it means making the ultimate sacrifice.
It's a powerful story that speaks volumes about the spirit of the Balinese people. But the Puputan also marked the end of Klungkung's independence. What happened to the Puri after this devastating event? Did their influence simply vanish? It's hard to imagine how they could maintain their influence after such a tragic and decisive event. Did they fade into obscurity, or did they find ways to adapt to this new reality?
The Puputan definitely marked a turning point for the Puri in Klungkung. While their formal political power diminished, under Dutch rule, their influence didn't entirely disappear. They continued to be seen as important cultural figures, keepers of traditions, and in some ways, a symbol of Balinese resilience.
So even though they lost their kingdom, they retained a degree of moral authority and cultural influence. That's pretty remarkable.
It speaks to the deep respect and reverence that the Balinese people had for their lineage and their role as guardians of tradition. But as we've seen, the Puri weren't a monolithic group. Their experiences and influence varied, depending on the specific kingdom and the circumstances.
That makes sense. Each kingdom had its own dynamics and its own relationship. With the Puri, it makes me think about Gianyar, the kingdom known for its vibrant art scene, especially in Ubud. You mentioned earlier that prominent Puri families were based in Gianyar. How did their story unfold, especially with the rising Dutch influence?
Gianyar offers a fascinating contrast to Klungkung. It emerged as a political and economic powerhouse in the 18th century, and the Puri families there, like those in Ubud and Peliatan, were known for their political acumen and their patronage of the arts.
So they were savvy operators who understood how to navigate the complexities of power and influence.
Exactly, and this political savvy proved invaluable. As the Dutch presence in Bali grew, unlike Klungkung, which met the Dutch with direct military resistance, the Puri and Gianyar often adopted a more diplomatic approach.
It's like they were playing a strategic game, trying to protect their interests of their culture, without provoking a devastating conflict. Did this strategy work? Were they able to maintain their influence under Dutch rule?
To a significant extent, yes. They skillfully navigated the challenges of colonial rule, forming alliances, adapting to changing circumstances, and even using their patronage of the arts to foster a sense of Balinese cultural identity that transcended political boundaries.
It's incredible how they used culture as a form of resistance and a way to preserve their identity in the face of colonial pressure. It makes you wonder what would have happened if all the Balinese kingdoms had chosen the path of armed resistance, like Klungkung. Would the outcome have been different?
That's a question historians continue to debate. There's no easy answer. But what we can say is that the Puri, through their diverse responses to the Dutch, shaped the course of Balinese history in profound ways. Their legacy, complex and multifaceted, continues to influence Bali today.
So what does this deep dive into ancient Bali tell us about the island's history and the enduring influence of the Puri?
It reveals a story of power, resilience, and cultural continuity. We've seen how the Puri, as descendants of ancient royal lineages, play pivotal roles in shaping Balinese society. From their influence in the kingdoms that emerged after the Majapahit conquest, to their diverse responses to the arrival of the Dutch, their legacy is woven into the fabric of Balinese life. From the arts and religious practices to the very notion of what it means to be Balinese.
It's a legacy that's both fascinating and complex. marked by moments of both triumph and tragedy. And it prompts us to consider how the echoes of the past continue to shape the present, not just in Bali, but in all societies around the world.
And that is the heart of the deep dive. We've journeyed through ancient kingdoms, explored intricate social structures, and witnessed the resilience of a culture in the face of change. Hopefully, this deep dive has left you with a deeper appreciation for the rich and complex history of Bali, and a desire to continue exploring the hidden stories that shape our world.
Until next time, keep diving.